Hi everyone, welcome once again to this self-knowledge course. Today we are going to be studying the lecture number 43 of this self-knowledge summary, right? And in this lecture, we are going to be talking about lust. Right, as we know that one of the bases of self knowledge and becoming one with our own inner being involves, the creation of the different bodies that will allow our consciousness to have full manifestation in all the different dimensions of nature. And for that reason, we need to achieve chastity. And chastity is that virtue that is rescued from the work that we do on our lust. Right? So today we're going to have this very interesting lecture. If you are not yet part of our WhatsApp or Telegram groups, I invite you to join us here in the description of this video. You can find the link to join our groups where you are going to receive all these free self-knowledge lectures along with complementary material on each of these topics, right? And well, the objective of today's topic is that we identify some of the lustful defects that are important to work in order to achieve chastity. So let's begin this lecture by clarifying what is chastity, since we may have certain misconceptions about it. And there is often a misconception that chastity is the same as celibacy, and nothing could be further from the truth, since celibacy goes in the opposite direction. Celibacy actually moves away from sex in search of God, right? While real chastity is discovering that what divinizes us is latent in our sexual energy, and that our divine part will develop through the wise use that we make of that sexual energy. And when we develop purity in our sexual practices with our own partner, then that sexual practice will take us closer every time to our own inner being. Okay, so chastity itself is the exact opposite of lust. Chastity is actually the non-loss of our sexual energy by any means and under any circumstances. So it is having like the power of using our sexual energy only during sexual intercourse with our partner, right? But never reaching orgasm and ejaculation during that sexual practice, but always making that powerful and wonderful sexual energy ascend towards our spine to our head to awaken our higher centers and to start creating the existential bodies of our being. So the power of chastity will be born in us as we understand the value of our sexual energy, and as we eliminate all the details of lust that we carry inside us, those lustful defects that lead us to constantly seek to expel the sexual energy, and that sometimes lead us to even lose it involuntarily, as in the case of the nocturnal emissions, right? And we will also need to work then on all those defects that want to take us away from sex, right? Those defects that doesn't like to practice sex, then those are actually lustful defects also. So what we must be clear about this is that if we really want to achieve chastity, we must begin a work of studying, understanding, and eliminating all those lustful eyes that we all have, because only in that way we'll have the level of control of our sexual organs and the level of purity in our energy, so that the sacred fire of the kundalini can be ignited within us and can ascend through our spine in the practice of suprasex with our partner. But when we talk about sexual fire, it is good that we keep in mind that there are two types of sexual fire. One is the fire of consciousness, which is also known as the sacred fire of the Kundalini, which is the one that ascends victoriously through the spinal column when we achieve chastity. And, that is when we no longer expel the sexual energy from our body, because we have already eliminated that fornicating eye. Okay? And the other type of sexual fire is the fire of the ego, which is actually the result of fornication, right? And every time we go to sex or even outside of sexual practice with the couple, for example, in masturbation, and we pour out our sexual energy, that inverted fire develops. And it is like that anxious fire, right? That we experience as a sexual desire when lust is activated in us. So this inverted fire is represented internally as a tail, also called the conda buffer organ, which is that tail that comes out of the table of all those demons that we see represented in paintings and sculptures. The reality is that all of us, thanks to fornication, have, and we have uh, that tail throughout the fornication in all of our existences. So in the astral world, we can see the tail, and it is with the development of chastity and the rise of the kundalini that we are going to be able to put an end to that satanic tail that we have, that we are astrally can see, since the very word kundalini precisely means end of the conda buffer. And well, the fire of the conda buffer is like a desperate fire, which fills us with anxiety, which leads us to desperately search for ways to masturbate or to look for a partner to excite us to the point of spilling the sexual energy, because it is a fire full of lust, right? But the fire of the kundalini, on the contrary, is a controlled, sublime fire, which leads us to make our sexual energy rise in sexual union with our partner, because it is a fire that is fruit of chastity. Okay? And well, now that we know that our sexual energy is creative, right? Its function will always be to create, since that is the function of our sexual center, to create. We must understand that every time that we go to a sexual practice, that energy will be doing a creation process. If, for example, we unite sexually with a partner of the opposite sex, of course, with the intention of having a child, then the union of the egg and the sperm will result in the creation of a physical child, right? But only one sperm will be needed to create that child. However, the rest of the sperm that are expelled in ejaculation during the copulation will also create. And they will go to create our psychological aggregates or details of our ego. And you can then now think in all those sexual practices in which we just go to expel the sexual energy. Then we are not going to be creating a child, and all those millions of sperms in the case of the man and all the sexual energy in the case of the woman is going to be creating all those psychological defects, will be reproducing the ego within us, because that is a creative energy. So it is also important to understand that the woman has her own semen, and that by reaching orgasm and expelling her sexual energy in that way, that energy also creates in her all those psychological defects. So every time that we reach orgasm and ejaculation, we are reproducing the ego, so that you can have that contrast on practicing suprasex, in which you never expel the sexual energy, but you make it ascend, you fill yourself with that energy, and you create yourself, you feed your consciousness, you awaken your consciousness with that sexual energy. But when you go to fornication and you spill the sexual energy, you are sleeping your consciousness more and more, and well, developing the ego. Each of our psychological defects, all the ego, all our different eyes, were created through the expulsion of the sexual creative energy out of the temple, that is our physical body. So, what is known as the fall of man occurred because sexual energy was expelled from his body. That is actually the original sin, okay? And from the moment that we expel the sexual energy, From the first time, we lost everything that deified us. We were expelled from paradise, which were actually higher levels of consciousness. Those higher levels of consciousness in which we lived before. And then the seven virtues of the soul were inverted, becoming those seven deadly sins that we know, these capital sins, or heads of the legion, that by continuing to fornicate and through their constant untransformed impressions, they multiplied in us until they formed the legion of eyes that we currently carry within us. That is why it is necessary to know that there are three types of sexology, or three ways to use sex, and understand that the three of them will always lead us to create. The first type of sexology, which is the one that we teach and that we encourage to practice in this self-knowledge course, is suprasex, or sexual magic. This is actually sex for regeneration. So through this sex, we will recover our lost divine state, since if we leave the paradisiacal state through the door of sex, it is through that same door that we are going to return. So this is like the sex of the gods, since through this sexuality, we will become gods, capable of creating through the word, because we are going to learn to transmute our sexual energy, and we can be able to direct through the verb that creative fire. Okay, and thanks to this practice of supersex, we will be able to create the children of light, which are the existential bodies of our being, the astral body, the mental body, the causal body, and so on, right? So that we can be born in the spiritual world. And the second type of sexology is normal sex. That is sex for generation, since it serves to generate a new organic physical life so that the species can reproduce, right? The important thing that we must understand is that in normal sex, that is when we want to have a child, when we go to sex, yeah, to have a child, the expulsion of the seminal fluid is not necessary either. The expulsion, imagine, every time that the man reaches or as ejaculation, he expels millions of sperms. That is not necessary, because only one is needed for pregnancy to occur. But what we must do is to make a request, right, to a particular divine mother, so that during the sexual practice of superior sex, of course, she chooses the most suitable sperm and directs it to the woman's egg so that the conception occurs. It is the method that is really called the immaculate conception, where fornication is not necessary for the process of creation of a children to occur, and that method was known by the beings in this planet that were still awakened, right? And the third type of sexuality is infrasex. And this is sex for degeneration. And this is a type of sexuality that the vast majority of human practices, since our consciousness is asleep, everybody says that is the only possible sex, the only possible and normal way to practice sex, and that is not the reality. This sex only seeks animal enjoyment, over stimulation of the sexual organs, over excitement, in order to experience that bestial pleasure of orgasm and ejaculation, expelling in turn all those solar atoms present in the seminal fluid. And by expelling our creative energy, it will reproduce in us, remember, the ego. It will create and feed the children of darkness, which are our psychological defects. So hence the importance of understanding that with each fornication, our consciousness is falling more and more asleep, and we become more and more perverse. And since the path of degeneration is downward path, along which it is very easy to go down, we very quickly stop experiencing that pleasure with the things we did before. right? And due to this, we will be needing all the time newer things, yeah, more degenerate things to continue experiencing that animal pleasure, which is actually everything opposite to true sexual enjoyment. And that the pleasure that is experienced through infrasex is opposite to the transcendental ecstasies that is obtained through the purification of the sexual practices. So we need to be working on lust in order to purify those sexual practices. And why should we also study our lustful eyes? Well, so that we can return from that downward path that we have traveled until now. Also, so that our sexual energy, which we have turned actually black and heavy due to so much lasciviousness and fornication, begin to purify. Yeah, so that the Kundalini serpent can awaken within us. If we do so, we'll be able to make our sexual energy ascend victoriously through our spine so that the regeneration of our physical and vital bodies begins to occur and the creation of our astral, mental, and causal bodies, which are currently in an embryonic state, will occur. For this creation to take place, we must achieve chastity. We must ensure that we no longer expel our sexual energy either inside or outside of sexual practices with our partner, but rather that we begin to fill ourselves with this powerful energy. And through the study and elimination of all our fornicating eyes, we will achieve chastity. And we will be increasingly purifying our sexual energy, making it lighter and more subtle so that it ascends more easily through our spine. And another important point is that working on our lust will allow us to recover sexual potency so that there is a lot of potency during sexual practice because many people already suffer from total sexual impotence, and this is due to the damage that they have generated to their own sexual apparatus through infrasex and through masturbation, and as a karma due to so much sexual degeneration that they have brought from even many existences that they continue developing in this one. And well, sexual potency can totally be recovered with the work of eliminating the eyes of fornication, which were precisely the ones that caused this state. And it will also be necessary to do objective negotiations with the divine law to pay that karma by helping humanity receive this knowledge so that those who wish to do so also have the opportunity to regenerate themselves. As they recover potency, their sexual apparatus will be regenerated and with the practice of suprasex. And well, this is actually the real healing process to be dying, to be practicing suprasex, and to pay for the karma. But it is also important to know that those who apparently don't directly suffer from sexual impotence also suffer from impotence because they all have their sexual potency conditioned to the different eyes of lust. So they are only in mood to have sex, and there is only erection or lubrication if there is, for example, masturbation, or if in the practice they use porno, or if the partner looks in such a way or treats them in such a way. And if these things are not there in the practice, or for example, oral sex and so on, then there is no sexual potency. So you don't have potency. The potency is trapped in those psychological defects because without them, you cannot go to sex successfully, right? And what we should do, we must eliminate all those defects of lust or eyes of lust so that you recover that sexual energy for consciousness. We must be working also on all those sensations, tensions, emotions, and thoughts that these defects generate in us And when we eliminate all that, then the potency goes again to consciousness. And you can consciously go to a sexual practice without needing all those infrasexual practices in order to be successful in suprasex. But also in the case of impotence, when you feel you don't have potency, for example, because you're not practicing whatever you are conditioned to do, you must also work all those sensations, all those emotions, tensions, and so on that impotence generates. And then we will gradually recover our full sexual potency for consciousness. We will no longer need any of that, and that way we can have long suprasexual practice lasting 1, 2, 3 hours. That is really having potency when you go to that purified sexual practices. Now, how should we study the eyes of lust? Well, we'll do it through intimate self-reflection directed by our own Divine Mother. This is a work that each one will do in an intimate and a very personal way through the meditation technique that we taught in Conference 22. And that meditation technique consists on bringing to meditation the scenes of our life in which these eyes of lust have manifested, right? And there we must observe, we must discover all the details that have manifested in desire, in our mind, in our emotion, in our sexual parts, and so on. And likewise, we must study each sensation that was experienced in the scene of lust that we are meditating on, must be observed, judged, and eliminated so that the superior sensations can arise in sexual practice, so that the superior emotions can arise, right? And the real potency, as we were seeing. So we are going to observe there in meditation each lustful emotion is each lascivious or self-justifying thought, and we are going to eliminate it detail by detail. Thus, working everything that we know has been manifested to us in this existence. When we seriously begin to do this work, then our particular Divine Mother will start guiding us in the astral plane, showing us in our dreams the eyes that we must work on and bring into our mind during meditation the scenes we must work on so that we can advance in that work. And well, to begin the work over lust, it is only necessary to ask ourselves, how many times have I fornicated in this existence? And in what ways? And immediately we'll begin to remember the first lustful eyes that manifested themselves in us in this life. Can be when we were kids, or when we were teenagers. You are going to remember. And we are going to also be remembering the order in which we developed them. And in that order, we are going to be eliminating them. And as I told you, this is a work that will be directed by our Divine Mother. So if we really want to do this, we will be successful. Because on our side is the most powerful force in the world, which is the force of love. This force is of an immense creative power, and likewise is of an immense destructive power to reduce everything impure in us to cosmic dust. So we are going to see now a short diagram where we'll see in summary the mode of operation of lust. And seeing this diagram can help us even to see things that before we didn't even know that we're lost. Because at this point of social degeneration where we find ourselves, things of a very perverse nature we are already accepted as normal, you know. So the first thing we will be to see what is lust. We will see all those eyes, how they manifest itself through the three heads of betrayal, which we will talk about in detail in the next conference, which are the desire, the mind, and the ill will. In order for us to agree to satisfy it, lust always makes us feel desire, right? It activates that inverted fire in us, that fire of the ego, which makes us feel the urge to look for ways to sexually stimulate us to reach fornication, which is to, spill the sexual energy. And in that way, lust ensures the subsistence of the entire ego, since as long as we continue to pour out our sexual energy, the entire ego will have food and life. And for this, the second traitor will always collaborate. The second traitor, which is our egoic mind, will always whisper to us an excuse, a very good justification, so that we agree to expel our sexual energy once and again, and that we always end up falling into ill will, which is to directly reach to the action of fornication, which is, well, the very purpose of lust. So, if we want to achieve chastity, we must do intense work on self observation, understanding, and eliminating the I that seeks to spill the sexual energy out of our body, which is the I of fornication. Fornicating means spilling the sexual energy in any form. And we reach fornication every time we reach the point of orgasm and ejaculation. The eye of orgasm must always be worked on. This eye, made up of many justifications, concepts, emotions, and many sensations and tensions, is the one that always prompts us to look for the sensation that causes the release of the sexual energy. And there are actually three means through which we always reach that point. We reach orgasm and ejaculation through masturbation, or through nocturnal emissions, or through vaginal sex, right? So let's look at each of these three in detail so we can see several lustful eyes that make them up. This with the intention of what? Of encouraging us to do a particular study, to discover in us the ways in which these lustful defects have manifested and continue to manifest themselves in us, so that we can eliminate all of them. So let's first look at masturbation. The masturbation eye is the one that stimulates the sexual apparatus to cause an orgasm in oneself or in another person. This is a psychological defect that urgently needs to be eradicated from our psychology if we want to begin a regeneration process. Masturbation is one of the ways in which most people today begin to expel their sexual energy. Mechanical imagination greatly participates in masturbation, since it is very common for people to imagine, for example, a person with whom they fantasize they are having sex with while they are masturbating themselves. And this results in the development of a very strong psychological entity, which in the case of the woman is known as the incubus, and in the case of the men is known as the succubus. This psychological entity, incubus or succubus, through constant masturbation can lead the person even to celibacy, not wanting to look for a partner, or feeling that they don't need a partner, right? Because they can please themselves. And on the other hand, it can lead to homosexuality. And this defect can feed itself so much that through the creative power of the imagination combined with the creative capacity of sexual energy, it can even come to be materialized physically. This entity develops every time the person masturbates, and masturbating evoke a figure, usually of the opposite sex, to arouse himself. And he creates and develops that terrible entity that then subject the person to the vice of masturbation. This is the entity that commonly appears in people's dreams to have sex with them, and leads them to a nocturnal emission to feed on their sexual energy. And well, despite what current doctors, sexologists, and others says, the reality is that masturbation is a very, very pernicious and harmful practice But to justify this practice, we convince ourselves that in the right measure, it is useful and beneficial, when the reality is that from little come much. And little by little, we feed this psychological entity until we end up making masturbation a vice that bring us terrible consequences, such as impotence, such as premature ejaculation, celibacy, and even homosexuality. And now, there are two types of masturbation. We must study both in detail to eliminate all the details of this that we have fed and in this existence. They are solitary masturbation, which consists of sexual self-stimulation, and there is collaborative masturbation, which is when we seek the collaboration of another person to stimulate ourselves sexually. In solitary masturbation, the self homosexual I develops, since every time we stimulate ourselves, we are obviously stimulating and sexually arousing someone of our same sex, which is ourselves, right? And with this action, it will become normal for us to sexually arouse someone of our same sex. Therefore, masturbation is in principle what later leads to homosexuality. And masturbation always goes hand in hand with another detail of lust, which is pornography, right? Pornography is a defect also um, that is also very necessary that we study in detail in meditation to eliminate it completely from our interior, since pornography contaminates our mind and subdues until it also becomes a terrible vice, right? When starting to eliminate the masturbating eye, it is also important to study all the methods that we use to stimulate ourselves, since each of those methods actually constitutes in itself a detail of lust. If we use any sexual device, any toy to please ourselves, such as artificial vaginas or penises, vibrators or dildos or inflatable dolls, or etc., we must study all those details and eliminate them. And in relation to sorry, that word is hard for me. Collaborative masturbation, we find that it is done manually, masturbating others and being masturbated most of the time. But this also can include what we call oral sex and anal sex, which are not really forms of sex, since sex, of course, exclusively when the male member is introduced into the female organ. Then, in those cases mentioned in oral and anal sex, what really occurs is oral and anal masturbation. Acts that unfailingly develops a homosexual eye. It is then necessary to work on these defects, reviewing in meditation the scenes in which you have nourished these defects in this existence, if this has been the case. There are other forms of masturbation that are even heavier, which are the when animals are used to stimulate ourselves sexually, what is known as bestiality, and when corpses are used in the same purpose, which is known as necrophilia. Each one will see in a particular way how far they have descended under the generative path with this masturbating eye, and will work in their intimate self-reflection and all the details that have nurtured in this existence, all the things that manifested before masturbation, all the desires, the tension, the justifications, the anxiety, all of that can be eliminated. You just have to observe, to understand, and to be asking our Divine Mother to eliminate every little detail that we observe. All the eyes, all the details that have manifested during masturbation, we must also observe them and eliminate them. And also all the things that we that are manifested after masturbation, all the details that we discovered there. And if we really work every day, because lust must be worked every day, if we work every day on this, we are going to be eliminating that psychological defect from us, and we will no longer be needing masturbation, and we are going to free ourselves from that anxiety, from that inverted sexual impulses that these psychological defects will activate in us. Well, let's now look at nocturnal emissions. Nocturnal emission is the loss of sexual energy during sleep. And why does nocturnal emission occurs? Well, it is basically because of lasciviousness, because of that repressed sexual desire that in the astral world takes shape in a scenario. Then we see ourselves having erotic dreams, and through the silver cord that connected the astral body to the physical body, we receive those sensations of overexcitement, causing us to reach orgasm and ejaculation in losing our sexual energy on the physical level, right? So, what should we work on to eliminate nocturnal emissions? Well, on the one hand, we must work on all the sexual impressions that we receive throughout the day. Through sight, through hearing, through smell, through taste and touch, we are receiving constantly impressions that activates lust in us. So every time that we receive one of those sexual impressions, for example, when we see a person that we find sexually attractive, or any image alluding sex, when we hear something of a sexual nature, can be a song, can be a conversation, can be a sound, etc., or any other impression that we receive from the outside world through the physical senses, if we don't transform it with psychological depth, self-observing and eliminating everything that is activated in us, that will remain in us as a sexual impression that during night will transform into an astral scenario that will lead us to lose our sexual energy. On the other hand is identification, and it occurs when we fall into identification with the impressions that we receive, and we begin to provoke ourselves by remembering, by fantasizing, by desiring, by feeding the desire to try to feel, to go, and also when we provoke others with conversations, with whatever, or with the way we dress, that lead us to identification. This identification end up leading us to seek to expel the sexual energy through masturbation, through sexual practice, and if not, that will remain as a frustration, like a frustrated sexual desire that lead us to lose the energy through nocturnal emission. It is also necessary to study all the lustful details that we feed in large quantities during the day through lasciviousness. Lasciviousness is that frustrated sexual desire that we carry in our minds that keep us thinking about sexual things all day long. So we must observe and eliminate our lust when we are looking for someone to who is attractive. This defect that likes to be staring at people but in a sexual way, must be eliminated. We must eliminate the eyes that watch pornography in detail, right? And each of the lustful defects that are manifested in us at every moment, leading us to imagine lustful things, to speak, to do lustful things, to plan, to seek, to feel, which always make us feel the desire to masturbate, to look for someone, to have sex, if not, nocturnal emission. So we must eliminate all of that from us. We are seeing then the importance of working on all those details in both reflective meditation and through the practice of death emotion, that is psychological death from moment to moment, to be transforming all those different impressions, so we don't call into identification and we don't end up feeding lust. So the eye of nocturnal emission can be eradicated from us. Actually, being a chaste people is not to lose the energy, nor during the vigil time in the third dimension, and nor during the sleeping time in the fifth dimension. And well, in relation to vaginal sex, there are many lustful details that manifest in us, in our emotion, mind, and body, and that when we unite sexually with our partner prevent us from successfully transmuting our sexual energy. So the work we do in eliminating all of these details will translate into the potency and the self-control that we need during the sexual practice. So we must work to annul the sexual practices that we already had. We must work also on all the concepts that we have and that make us justify going to a sexual practice and to expel the sexual energy. We must also reflect on the importance of keeping the sexual energy, because if we don't see a value on keeping the sexual energy inside our bodies and transmuting that sexual energy, then we are going to always fall into ill will, because we will not have the correct encouragement, to work for denying ourselves to our desires. We must work on all of the sensations that we experience in the body, and especially in the erogenous zones. We must eliminate them to recover the power over ourselves, which lead us to gradually begin to experience emotions and sensations of a superior level. We must study and eliminate the details of our lust that expel sexual energy with the excuse of reproducing ourselves, reproducing the species. The reproductive eye is the one to seek to commit fornication, but with the intention of starting a family or to having a child. And there we have to study a lot on all those concepts that we have, because when the person has a stable relationship, they feel like that they have the license to fornicate, and they give free rein to all their lust, right? Then we must study all the lustful details that were nourished during through that path, the path of reproduction, of the path of the matrimony. Since when we were single, in the process of flirting and in the engagement, there were certain details we must discover and eliminate. And during the commitment, the matrimony, the pregnancy, if it's the case, and so on, there were many other details. It is very important to work and eliminate the eyes that likes to have sex during pregnancy, or during menstrual period. That is actually a hard crime against nature. We must also study the eyes of contraceptives, because that is also like a justification and excuse to fornicate without fear. The eyes of abortions, the eyes of castrations, which lead us to commit also serious crimes against nature and against our own body, and also to degenerate more quickly until they lead us to experience boredom and insatisfaction, because that is what fornication does. We must work on them and eliminate them all from our psychology. A person, for example, dissatisfied with his or her partner, falls into quiet, heavy, lustful details such as adultery, such as prostitution. So it is very important that we work also on eliminating these defects. If we have been unfaithful to a partner, we must observe and eliminate all the desires, the justifications that lead us to commit adultery, as well as the actions we carried out for that purpose, as fidelity is one of the main requirements for a spiritual birth, right? It is also very important to study prostitution. Whether we have bought sex or whether we have sold ourselves sexually, we must study and eliminate it. There are many types of prostitutions, as well as many forms of adultery that we must reflect on, meditate on, and eliminate them in order to develop that virtue of fidelity. And well, the study of the aspect of witchcraft, it is also very important. Witchcraft occur when we already know the power of sex, and we then use sex but with egoic or even dark intentions. For example, to manipulate, for example, to subdue someone, for example, to carry out some revenge. Then we can also find the love spells, the sexual movements, the rapes, and so on. And well, this that I have mentioned here may seem like many eyes to work with, but the truth is that these are just a few details of the eyes of lust, which in reality are thousands and thousands. Each one is their own personal study, must discover all the detail, must understand, eliminate the details that have manifested in them, and the result of this will be wonderful. You're going to free yourself. You're going to develop the wonderful power of chastity. We will gradually free ourselves from so much lustful conditioning, from so much lasciviousness, from so much perversity, right? We will leave the degenerated and weak state in which we currently find ourselves, in which just by seeing or hearing about something of sexual nature, all our lust is already activated. And we will gradually pass to a state of purity and of self-control. We are going to be we're going to be masters of ourselves. And to become a master is not just sitting there and trying to appear to be pure. No, it's actually to become pure. And we become pure as we study on all those details. In some of these eyes, with the process of psychological death, is going to be seen. Right? For example, in the astral plane, we're going to see how beasts, how animals, how entities that internally represents the psychological aggregates die. Also, on the astral plane, we will see ourselves washing, for example, our hair. That represents our chastity, how our hair will grow in the astral plane. That represents that we are growing in chastity. Other of these defects will be taken out of our spinal column and will be thrown into the abyss to be completely executed in the work of the second mountain. And well, the regeneration process begins with the disintegration of all the defects that we know we have. These eyes that we have mentioned today prevent us from achieving fidelity, chastity, and love. To the extent that we study these eyes, we will understand the mistakes that we have made, and we will perfect the practices of suprasex. I really hope that this lecture, this explanation have helped you understand the urgent need to work on these defects if you really want to advance in your spiritual development. And I hope that it encourages you to do this work. Yeah, and well, this is only a guidance. And well, thank you very much to everyone who has participated in this conference. If you have any question or comments, you can leave them here in the comment sections, and you can contact us directly, and we'll be gladly solving any question you have. And I want to invite you to our next conference, in which we'll talk about treason. There we are going to see in detail the three aspects of treason, which are three internal demons that always lead us to betray others and to betray our unconsciousness. So don't miss that very interesting lecture that we will be sharing with you. And remember, if you are not yet part of our groups, here in the description of this video, you can find the link to join our groups and receive their complementary material on each of these self-knowledge lectures. Thank you very much, people, and well, see you the next time. Thank you.